Yeah, so I mean, before we get started, congratulations on just recently closing Intimate Exposures up in Reading. I
Yep.
had the opportunity to see it on its closing night, and wow, it was really spectacular. It was a very, very special piece. So thank you for sharing that with the community in Reading.
Oh,
Um,
it was a fun project.
yeah, so first, I want to ask you a bit about that. I mean, this project was commissioned by the Reading Theater Project.
Right.
Um, and so it's not the first time you've been commissioned, obviously, to write a piece, but I'm wondering, um, how how does your process differ being commissioned to write something versus sort of organically coming across a story that you feel needs to be told?
Mm. Well, it's not well the process of developing the play, you mean?
Yeah.
Or writing a play? Uh well, it's not a it's not a whole lot different really from um something that I might just come up with on my own and want to and I find compelling and want to write. I haven't been in a position of accepting a commission for something that I was lukewarm about, if you put it that
Okay.
way. Um, so the few times I've had the reason why I signed on to this project was because I was really intrigued by the subject matter. Um, I mean, initially, Vicky, the producer, the Vicky Holler Graff, who's the producer at Reading Theater Project, she and I had talked about applying for a grant to develop. There was a grant available for ensemble theaters to develop a play um, with a playwright, and we decided we were going to try for that. And we had discussed a couple of ideas, and she presented this project to me, something that she had already been thinking about. And then initially, I wasn't a little skeptical at first, but when I took a look at the collection and got a hold of the book and looked at the photographs, um, I was really intrigued. And I just thought, that I was just really kind of driven by the curiosity of these photos because they really are not what you would expect. Somebody's taking pictures in a brothel, you expect, a lot of dirty pictures, but that's not what he was doing. He was really looking at these women through an artist's eye. And there are a number of nudes in the collection, but his presentation of them is kind of really in keeping with a long um, tradition within the art world of how the nude is presented in paintings and photographs it's an artistic kind of presentation. It's not pornographic in any way. Um, so when I saw those um, pictures, I was just kind of intrigued by the whole idea of what drove this guy to want to do this. He apparently kept it a secret. There's no evidence that he ever, tried to capitalize on it to any degree that anyone could find any evidence of. And so it was something he was doing. It was purely art for art's sake. Um, and I was intrigued by the women in the photographs, curious about them because we don't know anything about them.
Mhm.
So those that kind of drew me into the project. And then it was also at the time we were talking about this, we were just coming off COVID. Um, and theater had just, shut down everywhere. So this was a chance to work on something that I knew was going to get a production eventually. It would get on his feet. So that, I mean, that was an incentive too, to work on something because a lot of times some theaters might commission you to write plays, but um, there's not necessarily a guarantee that they're going to produce the play. Um, um, so when you have an offer to write something and there's guarantee at the end that there's going to be a production, and that's a pretty good inducement too.
Right. Right. Yeah, I was really struck by this play. I was reading a bit too that it seems in the early stages of development, it was a really collaborative process between you and the Reading Theater Project. I read somewhere that you had were going to these meetings and just sort of brainstorming on what the project should be.
Yeah,
At one point, you said, I think there were two words or something that really stuck out to you about the project, or things
right.
you wanted to capture through it. So how was that working sort of collaboratively and then going away and then writing?
Well, initially, what we did was initially we had conversations about, I think there was an initial meeting where we talked about, we got together and a lot of people who were involved with the company came, and we talked about the photographs and what they conveyed to us. Um, it was really kind of a conversation around theme, really. So we did some brainstorming around, and one of the things that we did was it's kind of a writing exercise, but I had everybody do it. It was where you pick a word, you put it at the center of the paper, and the word could be it could be anything, like image maybe would be the word you put at the center. And then you do immediately just start thinking at whatever next word comes to mind. You write that down and you sort of develop a branch of words. So if the next word coming off of image might be, say, picture. So you write picture down, and then what comes off of picture? It might be anything. It could be like pretty. And what comes off of that? It might be beauty. And so you fill up the page with all of these kinds of just it's really a brainstorming on paper. And I had and if everyone did it. And then we talked about what words came up, and what words came up um, for more than one person. And we had a sort of filled a couple of sheets of paper with just these words, and the words were really a sort of a view towards a view into what these photographs triggered within the people in the group, various. And so a couple of things floated to the surface in terms of really the most compelling, and it was kind of a group consensus that one of the words was dignity and the other one was elevate. So these were the sort of the through line through sort of informed my thinking about the play, because as the presentation of the women in the pictures, he he really does give them their dignity, even where they're posing in the nude. I mean, these are not they're not the images aren't degrading to them. They're and in some cases they are kind of, there's this sense that he's doing honor to some of these women with these images, and that they're a sense of elevation, and in some cases almost a literal sense of elevation. He's taking pictures of them. He's got this moon in his studio. It's an element we worked into the play, but and they're posing in the moon in various states of dress or undress, and he's taking their picture in the moon. It's like literally lifting them up to the clouds. Um, and I found out later that that was a kind of a common prop in a lot of um, professional studios in the period, um, that they were called paper moon shots, and people would sit in the moon and get their pictures of them, portrait of themselves taken in the moon, and it was a kind of a whimsical thing that was very popular at the time.
Yeah. Yeah,
So yeah,
no,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, so I was just saying that's we had so we met we had a series of meetings, Um, I have to go back and look at my journal to remember the exact progression, but we did come up with this brainstorm of words that we wrote out on have them on like these big
Mhm.
poster size post-it notes. So we wrote them out on, and they're on my wall upstairs. Thinking, um, so that was sort of a guide. It provided me with some parameters or guidance for thinking about the play. And then we went away and we did some research. Some of the members of the company did some research, and I did some book research into the business of prostitution in the 19th century. There are several books I came across. Um, and then into Reading in at that point in history. And I ended up going back and doing a lot more hits. And newspapers.com is a great place to go for just period detail. And William Goldman shows up in the Reading Times, which is one of the daily papers that's digitized. And he shows up all over the place. He's going to parties. He's a, he's a Toastmaster at some dinner. Um, he's involved in this big costume ball that they did every February. This German Singing Society hosted this big costume ball. It was front page news, and the list of who were the guests and people came in costume and who won what prize for what costume and all of this kind of stuff. It's like the social life. This is high society social life was front page news at that time. So you get a sense, you start to get a kind of a sketchy picture of this guy and the kind of the maybe the parameters of his life. Is very active socially. Sal Shearer shows up when she's arrested on several occasions.
Okay.
And one really curious story I came across about Sal Shearer was apparently when she was um, incarcerated, she ended up spending about 3 months in a jail for running her brothel. And there were these women, these involved in the social purity movement, which was aimed at reforming um, the whole red light districts. It really wanted to shut down the red light districts. Um, they got permission to go into the jail and meet with Sal and try to you know bring her bring her to salvation and get her to see the error of her
Wow.
way. It didn't work because not long after she got out, she was
Mhm.
back in business. So Sal wasn't persuaded, but
So was
it
that
was.
the I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Was that the birth of, because there is that conflict between that social purity movement and then our main sort of plot of William Goldman and his photography. Is that where that was born out of? That
Yeah, well, it originated just in the course of doing some general research. I mean, I think we came across and um that there was a while the prostitution wasn't technically legal in the period, it was tolerated. And there were occasional crackdowns, and usually politically motivated. People would get agitated about it, and elections coming up, and elected officials would try to make a demonstration that they were concerned about all this. When um, a lot of times they were actually benefiting, if not customers, and most of them were customers of the houses. They were also some of them getting kickbacks. To, you know, basically, there was a deal, so they wouldn't crack down on the houses. Um, so it was kind of, we sort of knew from the beginning that this was something that was happening in the period as well. But some of those details about exactly what they were doing I didn't, and in Reading anyway, and or in the region, I didn't get until I took a deeper dive into the newspapers and came up with that tidbit about Sal, and came across a number of articles about the social purity movement. So it was a real thing,
Right.
and it was something that was not just, I mean, it wasn't just, you know, specific to Reading. It was a national movement. Um, so yeah, so in the course of the conversations, it was kind of like we sort of went from the general to much more specific, and so we started out talking about sort of thematically, and then we started to get a little more specific about um, what the story might be, about potential plot points, characters, that kind of thing. Um, and then I went away and started writing.
Okay.
And so a lot of that foundation work is work that I would have done under an ordinarily I would do that on my own. I'd be in the corner doing my brainstorming. I'd be thinking about characters. I'd be thinking about plot. I would be doing research, all of that. And I would have done it on my own. But instead, because it was a project of the company, um, involved people who are members of the company in sort of the thinking process part of writing the play. And then when it came time to write the play, I went away and I wrote a series of drafts. Um, and we had then a series of readings of successive drafts, which was really very helpful. And the initial draft, I think actually it was a partial draft. I wasn't able to completely finish it, but we had a reading in August of 23 of what I had, which was about 60 pages. We just read it so I could hear what I had and got some, impact, or I should say, um, input from the people who came out to read, and then went away, and then I came back in December with a complete draft, which was by then I'd gone through a series of drafts. So I had finished a first draft, and one of the members of the company read it. I asked her, got someone to read it, and she read it and gave me a few notes on it, and then I did several revisions, and in December we read that draft. And then I went away and did some more work, and then we had a reading in March.
Okay.
So it was 1, 2, 3, and we ended up having a series of 5 readings because we met again in August and had a read through the end of August, and then in September, the first read for the rehearsal. So it's like 4 developmental readings.
Okay. And then
Um,
we had the finished product.
and then the rehearsal drafts.
Okay.
So the first day of rehearsal, we did a read through the rehearsal draft. Yeah. Um,
And then so was it still being altered through the rehearsal process?
yeah, because once you get into rehearsal with a new play, you're always going to make discoveries.
Hmm.
And a lot of it is just, for me, it's like I'm finding places where I can tighten it up. So I made a number of cuts
Okay.
so throughout the play, certain scenes or line adjustments, or there are a few places where the actors or the director felt like we needed something more at a certain place. In one instance, we had a transition that we needed to the actor just needed more time, to make a
Mhm.
costume change. So I had one of the characters had a monologue. It's like the narrator character, Bo. So I just embellished that a bit to make it a little longer so that the actor then was able to make the transition. So that's kind of stuff that you do when you get into rehearsal. You're just kind of making at that point, it's almost like technical kind of discoveries. You realize you don't need as much dialogue in a certain moment, or there may be a beat you want to cut. The first scene in the studio, when she comes in, and he takes her picture, that scene, there was a section of it I ended up cutting. And it was really kind of for technical reasons, because I was also in the process of writing the play. One of the things I was doing was trying to research um, the photographic techniques of the period. And so I was able to get on a call with the man who pulled the collection together. He was an art historian named Robert Flynn Johnson, and he was able to kind of bring me up to speed on the kind of camera that was used, and the kind of the medium, which was still glass plates, but it was what at that point was called a dry gelatin plate. Um, and this, so initially I was thinking that it was what you would call a wet collodion process, and that kind of process. It basically what it means is that the photographer, before he takes a picture, has to go into the dark room and treat the plate with chemicals himself, and then put it into a sleeve that that blocks out all the light, and then bring it back into the studio before he puts in the camera. And that under that process, he's got about 15 minutes. Once he treats the plate, he's got to take the picture within about 15 minutes. So this is probably getting much more detailed than you want.
Oh
But at
no,
any rate,
I love it.
I thought, so initially I started out thinking, oh, they're using this wet collodion process, because I hadn't done a lot of research into the the technology before I started to write. And so because I'm operating under there's a playwright named Mark Ravenhill. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a British playwright. It's worth checking out. He's writes some really cool
Okay.
plays. But he says, don't get too hung up on your research. Start or write the draft, because the draft will then tell you, it will present a lot of questions, and that you're going to have to answer, and it will tell you where your research has to take you. So I thought, well, that's not a bad idea. So because one of the hazards of writing plays based on in history is you can really go down rabbit holes of research and just keep on reading and reading and reading, and it comes a point where you just have to say, okay, enough. We got to write the play. So I started writing the play. I had one understanding of the technology, and then about midway through, got a course correction when I found out that by 1892 they were using what they called dry plates. These were already chemically treated in a factory, and they arrived in a box, and you could buy them in bulk, and that's what the photographers were using.
Okay.
So it meant that he did not have to leave the room to go prepare the plate.
Mhm.
It's already ready. And so in the earlier draft, I had him leave the room to go prepare the plate, and then she's looking around and sort of carrying on an imaginary conversation with some of the pictures on the wall. So he comes back, and then they proceed with the scene. Well, that was no longer necessary, and it was actually cleaner if he didn't leave the room. So we chopped that out, and it really was only about a half a page of dialogue, but it made a huge difference, because keeping the characters in the scene together always keeps the pressure on the characters. So I felt the scene worked so much better if he didn't leave.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just the kind of thing. That's an example of um, the kind of corrections you might make in the course of working on the play, and then when you get into the rehearsal process, um, realizing that we don't need something, you just so I think that's hard for a lot of writers to
Yeah.
do, because they get kind of married to the language or whatever, but my theory is if it doesn't work, get rid of it. Because really ultimately, what you want is you want for the scenes to drive, and anything that's going to slow it down, or once a character has achieved their objective within a scene, you've got a beat and they're after something and it's clear they got it or they don't have it, then you need to move on to the next thing. So
Yeah.
belaboring, and that's kind of it's a bit of it's a little, it takes a little bit of, it's a bit intuitive at points to determine where you can really excise certain things. We had some debates with the director. There was some stuff that I initially said I was going to cut, and he said he thought it was important to the characters. But the more I watched the rehearsals, the more I became convinced it really it was something happening in the second act. And I really felt like, no, I mean, it's nice character information, but at this point, we've got to drive forward to the
Right.
resolution. I felt like, once you're getting on the roller coaster and we're getting over the top ramp and we going down to the bottom and things accelerate, and you just don't want anything that's going to slow it down. So ultimately we cut it.
Right. Yeah, I suppose I'm wondering, obviously you're very much bound to the research in a certain degree, but I wonder where you feel the line is between staying true to the reality of the time versus where you feel you're comfortable taking creative liberties and how you're able to tell this story.
Yeah. Um, well, with this particular project, there really wasn't any story. Um, we didn't know enough about Billy. We didn't know enough about Sally, and we had no information at all on the women in the house. All we knew is that this guy, who's very socially active in his community, apparently very well liked and respected within his profession, um, good photographer, is taking pictures in a brothel, and here are the pictures that he took. Um, so that's what we knew. And what we knew about the community at the time, Reading at the time was one of the most prosperous cities in America, that it was really the Gilded Age was writ large in Reading. Um, very very wealthy people um, whose activities are documented breathlessly in the newspapers. Um, and then a lot of poor people, working people who aren't making very much money. And this whole social phenomenon of the red light districts at the time, where prostitution is more or less tolerated, but even if it is technically isn't legal and tolerated, because of a lot of Victorian attitudes towards sex and sexuality at the time, and particularly female sexuality. The idea that nice girls will do their duty by their husbands, but they're not supposed to like it. Um, Whereas these lower class women, and it's always lower class women who ended up, working girls or people who come out of poverty, who are going to end up in the brothels. Um, it's a different class, and they apparently are allowed to like it, or whether they actually, not sure. But from what I read, I mean, not saying that they enjoyed the job per se, but it was a kind of a twisted world where these guys would go to the brothel and they could sort of cut loose
Hmm.
with the women in the brothels in ways that they couldn't do with their wives, who were supposedly respectable women. So it was a bit of a twisted mentality. It was a Victorian mentality, and that's part of what fed into this whole um, culture.
Right.
So that's all I knew, really. I had this sort of the broad outlines, and what what I ended up, what I guess what finally gave me the um, propulsion towards the story was I looked at what's the driving question for me is how does it change you if someone looks at you in a way that you've never really seen yourself and then causes you to see yourself much differently? So the character of Edie is this young woman who's come up through hard times. She, and which is true of a lot of women who ended up in a brothel. Her father has died. Her mother is remarried. Her stepfather is actually abusive. He dies, and she ends up going to work in the silk mills at a very young age, at the age of 10 or 11, and then it ultimately ends up working in the brothels because it's a hell of a lot better money and in many respects a much, much easier life, which is why a lot of the young women went to the brothels. So the question for me was, how does this whole process of making art change her and change him, change William Goldman, change Billy? And one of the questions that came up in the brainstorming sessions that we did with the company was a question somebody had asked, how is Billy liberated? And that to me was a really interesting question, and also informed my thinking as I went forward with the play. Was how is he liberated? How is he ultimately find some freedom in the whole process of doing this? So basically, it was really about kind of, once you realize you've got that's the ultimate question for any play, is how is a character transformed? Then it was about sort of thinking through a series of moments that guide us through this transformation, and a lot of it was just sort of discoveries made on the page. Really, I started out writing some scenes that were sort of exploratory scenes, just to get to know the characters and figure out what might be going on with them. And some of those scenes are still in the play. I just developed them further, and they became scenes in the play. And once I got a hook into who I thought Edie was and who I thought Billy was, then it was kind of about extrapolating how their encounter and how their partnership ultimately, how is that going to make trouble? Which is what you want. You want some trouble in the play. How could that make trouble? And how is that? How does it put them, either one of them, at risk, and in what way? And then how does it change their expectations of life? And I think it changes hers quite a bit.
Yeah.
So those are sort of the threads that I kind of pulled on to write the play. And in terms of sticking to feeling like what you're asking, what liberties there are, well, I mean, it's the storyline is essentially invented. It's kind of my imagining of what propelled him to take these pictures and potentially what impact they may have had. But it's fiction. The story is basically fiction. Whereas what I tried to be true to was the culture of the brothels, and the just sort of the culture of the times. Victorian, the Victorian era, 1892 Reading. Tried to set this story firmly in that, in that era. So I'm not attempting to take any liberties with historical fact when it comes to the world in which the story, Edie and Billy's story, plays out.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm sorry too, by the way, Zoom is limiting us to 40 minutes here, so I think it'll sort of cancel the meeting, but listen, if you have to go, that is perfectly fine, but if not, I can send you another link when this one
But you
expires.
actually don't have to do that.
Oh, really?
I do this all the time. When it bumps us out, you just click on the same link and we'll get back in again.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. That's wonderful. Uh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's annoying, but I've
Yeah,
done
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so you had Sal, you had Billy Goldman as your two core characters, but then the women that you invent are sort of, and I guess even too we have our narrator here, we have
Yeah.
this client that Edie visits a lot. And I assume these are all of these are invented. So
Yeah.
how do you create these characters? Because specifically, um your work has been called subversive, particularly in your characterizations, in the way that you are able to sort of realize characters as more than stereotypes or more than archetypes, but
Hmm.
to render them sort of in their totality. So how do you do this? How do you develop these characters going off of very, very little?
Um, well, it's just sort of the way anybody does if you're when you're writing if writing fiction, you're gonna develop um characters. They may be inspired by true life people, but you're gonna that's a starting point, and then you sort of go with it. I mean, and in Billy's case, we had a little more to hang things on because we had more details about his life. But he never left, he didn't leave anything behind. It's not like there were any diaries or journals or anything where I could get insights into what he was thinking or what why he did the things he did. So we could only speculate. In the case of Edie and Lizzie and Sal, there was research I did through books that I had read about prostitution. One of them, a great book, is called The Lost Sisterhood by a woman named Ruth Rosen. And it's really about the culture of the brothels prior to about 1915, which is around that time is when the reform movement finally succeeded in shutting down the red light districts. Um, Prior to that, the so she goes into detail about because there's research done into the life within the brothels, and there were first person accounts and that kind of thing that she draws on. So there was so that gave me some sense of some of the things that might transpire. And the whole idea of the sisterhood, I think, was important. The idea of the way in which the women supported each other, and so um, it was clear from the beginning that that was something that I felt was important to the play. And so there had to be another woman in the house, and who was that going to be? And so having Lizzie come in as kind of a newcomer, whom Edie can befriend and guide um, and advise. It was kind of an obvious choice that there'd be a character like that. And so, um, who is she? Where did she come from? What's driving her to this place? We knew that it was true that at the time that people who would recruit for prostitutes often recruited in department stores, strangely enough.
Wow.
That women who went to work in department stores were considered vulnerable to being procured to people who procured for brothels.
Cut off, you were talking about Lizzie being, integrated into the brothel through Edie and um
Yeah. So I mean it was so I think your question was how do you create
yeah,
fictional
I'm
characters?
I'm I'm wondering how you, because it's I mean, you're also, in a lot of your work, you're representing people that have been historically marginalized. Um and here you are bringing a face and a voice to them. Um
Mhm.
so really, I guess I'm wondering how, if you feel a type of responsibility in the way you construct these people. You're talking about really wanting to produce some dignity, and elevate their stories. So, Uh,
Right.
yeah, I'm interested in this particularly how these, sort of underrepresented people are being constructed.
Yeah. Well, I think part of what went into thinking about it was I wanted to I wanted to present each of the characters as a like a complete person. Um, so to try to avoid stereotypes. Um, how whether or not I succeeded, I'll let somebody else somebody else can decide whether or not I succeeded. But I feel like it was getting into trying to get into the interior a bit more. So for Lizzie and Edie, it's also you know, I saw Lizzie as a little more childlike a character. She's meant to be quite young, about 16, and not a very mature 16. She's not somebody who's necessarily thinking ahead or thinking through everything, but kind of reactive. She's kind of a reactive character. She's like basically trying to get away. She's basically spent her whole life um, trying to get away from one bad situation and kind of jumping from the frying pan and if not into the fire, then into another frying pan. And so it seems like she's always in a state of dissatisfaction with her situation, and not through her own fault, but because a girl in those circumstances at that time didn't have a lot of great choices. And a lot of it depended on the man in your life. If your father was irresponsible, or he had died or abandoned the family, um, and the women were left pretty much on their own, it was very seldom, unless you came from a family of means, but you're talking about working class people or poor people, it was never going to be a great outcome. I mean, you weren't going to be able to get an education, you weren't going to be able to really get ahead in life, and you weren't going to be put in a situation um, where you're going to be put in the path of, marriageable partners who are going to be able to bring you up in the world. Um, More than likely, you're pretty much stuck where you are. And getting ahead for a woman at that time really depended on connecting herself to the right guy, and making a good marriage. And for these girls, those opportunities are very narrow. So it was kind of realizing the facts of what a girl in that circumstances would be dealing with, and kind of inventing the background for her and the situations for her and what she's coming out of and jumping into. Um, and the lure and attraction of just material comfort, which is something that she experiences at the brothel that I don't think she had much of, previously. I mean, she's sleeping on, you know, very comfortable bedding. She gets to wear nice clothes. She's eating well. These are as opposed to a really hand-to-mouth existence when she's trying to get by on her own, working as a department store clerk.
Hmm.
This job's paid very little. There was a book that I also read a book by Ruth Rosen called oh, blanking on the name of the book right now. I have it. I can get it for you. But it's a letters. It was called the Mamie Papers, and this was a young woman named Mamie Prinzer who had been trafficked at a young age, at the age of 14, and worked as a prostitute for a few years. And then this other woman who was a wealthy woman who wanted to get her out of that life, was trying to offer her, moral support and guidance, and sometimes financial support. And so Mamie and this woman wrote, corresponded, and her letters to Mamie didn't survive, but Mamie's letters did. And so this is a collection of Mamie's letters to her, and the recurring theme throughout many of her letters is just trying to get pull the money together to pay that week's rent. And the temptation to go back with previous clients, or what she called take a date with somebody, was so strong because the financial pressures were so intense. And as much as she wanted to go straight and be clean and have, live the respectable life, it was incredibly difficult. And she, at that time, she was actually married. The guy she was married to just had a hard time keeping a job. And he wasn't a great support for her. And what she could earn was really restricted. I think she got a job selling advertising or different kinds of jobs, but they weren't full-time. It wasn't full-time steady work. And it was just an intense struggle. And when you're in that kind of a situation, where you're lucky to be able to make the rent and hardly anything left over for, a decent meal, it's not surprising that a lot of women would simply say, okay, well, I'm doing this because I just can't take living like this. I
Right.
can't take this constant insecurity. At least if I go work for Sal, uh, I know I've got a room, I've got a place to be, and I can afford nice clothes, and I got enough money. I can go to the theater, with stuff that was completely out of reach um, previously.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
yeah,
really
yeah. So it's really about, I guess, pulling in a lot of details and thinking about that character, and then they kind of evolve, and I start to hear their voice and start to get a sense of them, and then it just kind of go from there.
yeah.
Uh, yeah. So there's a little bit of alchemy in it that it's hard to explain.
Yeah. I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I something that's so present in the play is this central question of, I suppose, the responsibility of art.
Yeah.
In the beginning of the play, Goldman, I guess, has maybe a curiosity in these women, but as the play goes on, I think it really turns into something more resembling like a commitment or a responsibility to them. So I'm wondering, um, you're certainly no stranger to writing historical plays. You're no stranger to writing plays with very clear sort of social messaging in them. So I'm wondering what you believe to be the responsibility of yourself as a playwright, as a writer, as somebody who is grappling with history and really these big social elements.
Um, well, I think writing a history play, or play based in true events, you always have the tension is there between trying to craft story with that drives with an arc. You're usually dealing with some kind of a 3 or 5 act structure. And so, there's going to be major turning points, and you're going to be building to a climactic moment and ultimately to a resolution. I mean, it's sort of the broad bones of play structure, unless you're really doing something really experimental and presentational, which is a whole different thing. Like, so, so you've got to figure out your major elements, what you're driving towards, and you've got to have some idea of what might be the kind of the big turning points in the play. Um, and you can't be too married to the historical sequence of events. sometimes you do have to kind of play around with a little bit of the actual events. Like, you're not going to depict absolutely everything that happened. Um, but there may be key events that you feel like you really need to include. Like when I wrote Radium Girls, that was an early play. It was like really my first professional production. And that was a big struggle, was to figure out how to be true to the story. And I tried to be true to the story and to the characters. And I found that that didn't make for a really, really good play because it just got bogged down. And it didn't really drive. It was just, oh, well, I've got to have this, I've got to show this, but then step back from it and realized, no, I've got to let some of these things go. I just, and one of the, for that particular play, one of the key things I let go, I don't know if you're familiar with that one or not,
I
was
am. I
about,
actually just reread it.
oh, okay. So that one is about, just for anybody else who doesn't know, it's about the women who worked in the watch factories in the 1920s and painting watch dials with radium lace paints. Um, I've got a lot. You know what? I'm going to close the curtain behind me because I think I don't know if you've got a very good,
Okay, yeah, sure, no worries.
a bit of glare. So maybe this is better. Um, so the women were working in the watch factories and they're painting the watch dials with radium lace paint. And ultimately it led to a lot of women getting sick, and then it led to this lawsuit, and the lawsuit was basis of the play, a major element in the play. At any rate, when I first wrote early drafts, I tried to be true to the actual timeline sequence of events. And one of the things that happened was that Arthur Reeder, who was the president of the company and who is a major character in the play, was fired. The U.S. Radium Corporation fired him before it ever went to court. They didn't like the way he had handled the whole thing, and the board let him
Oh,
go. So that was in an early draft of the play. And after successive readings of that with that element in it, I realized I had to let it go, because once he's left the company, he no longer he can only participate as a bystander. He doesn't have, he has nothing at stake anymore. He's already lost. He's out of it. And even though that was true, I revised the play. It was after a kind of disastrous reading where it was just wasn't working, and I just thought, I got to toss this and start over. I didn't start over completely. I just I just reorganized the structure, but I realized I had to drop that because it didn't work dramatically. It doesn't work dramatically if the major character, if you're um falls out of falls out of the action basically before the action is complete. Um, so that was a case where yeah, I made a big I made a decision to and so once he got rid of that, and he was sort of in it to the end, so he does eventually lose his job, and not to the end of the play, not till so it just works so much better because now we have a character who's invested, and he's still got something to strive towards. Um, and that's what you need to have. So, but one thing though, I feel that if you're writing a play based on historical events, and you do have um, an actual a story that's documented in history, like in the case of this lawsuit that the women brought against U.S. Radium, that you have to be true. I feel like my obligation is to be true to this spirit of the characters and true to the outcome. in other words, I didn't feel like I could change the ending, you
Yeah.
know, like they didn't actually win the lawsuit. What happened was, they essentially, the company finally agreed to a settlement just to, to, to end it all. They agreed to, but the company did capitulate.
Mhm.
So it was a victory of a sense for the women. But it wasn't the victory they wanted, then they didn't get what they wanted. They had to settle for a whole lot less monetarily, but still um, it was kind of a moral victory for them. They fought back and um, they did win um, a settlement. The company had to capitulate and agree to pay them compensation. Um, and it would have been maybe much more dramatic and satisfying if it in the play it had gone to trial and they won and they won the lawsuit. But I felt like that's not what really happened. And um I didn't feel like that was something I could do. It was like monkey with the ending,
Mm.
the resolution of how things resolved. So if you're writing a play based on historical events, I feel like how you get to to that resolution, you may have to take liberties, but I feel like that's the resolution. If that's the story you're telling, then that's the ending, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and that's not something I would um, alter. In the case of this play, Intimate Exposures, the story is entirely fictional. So the ultimate resolution is there's no set ending because there isn't any story in history that we were um, pulling from. It's based on true characters, but the story is entirely invented. So
Right.
it's a different consideration. Yeah.
Yeah. I know at least with Radium Girls, after its first premiere and first initial run, um, you sort of took it back back to the drawing board a little bit and then made some slight revisions going forward. Is that going to be a similar thing here with Intimate Exposures? Do you find yourself um, wanting to revisit it?
Yeah, I probably will. It's a it's a really kind of an ambitious play. They're both really ambitious plays now that I think about it. And it took a lot of drafts to get Radium Girls to a place where I felt like it was, worked on stage. But after seeing it in the first production, I was lucky. I got a couple of subsequent productions at universities and where I had a chance to continue to refine the script. And so ultimately I did make some changes in the script after the first production. Um, and I think that I would do the same here. There are a few things I cut that I think I would restore.
Hmm.
Um, and there's um, it really has to do with the sequence of scenes. There's one or two events I think I would shuffle some things around.
Huh. Wow, interesting. Yeah, so then I guess this is a tougher question. How do you know when a play is finished?
Um, well, I kind of feel like that's I I mean the flip answer is when I'm tired of working on it, I guess. But I feel like when I see it on its feet and I feel like there's no place in the play that pulls me out or where I feel like I've um got something that is like nagging it at me. Like in the case of this play, the big piece that I feel like, having seen it on its feet, that I think I would rework is like the scene. If you recall, there's towards the end of the play, Edie and Clayton, they have a scene and he's together where she tries to return this necklace to him, and he basically breaks down and more or less capitulates. Like he doesn't want to give her up.
Mm.
He feels like he should, feels like it's time, he must, but he can't bear the thought of because he buys into this Victorian mentality that he's going to be married, and that's the end of a happy sex life for him. It's like that his wife is his fiance is a respectable young lady, and therefore that means just the end of passion.
Mhm.
And he can't bear that. So once we have that moment, and where he basically says there has to be a way for me to keep you in my life, I want to get next. I want to go directly to the scene in the studio. That is, I felt like having the scene with Lizzie and um her beau, Jimmy. Immediately after that, for me that didn't work. I felt it made me feel a little impatient. Like I wasn't as interested in those two characters as I was interested in what's going to happen to Edie, and I wanted to get on with it. And I felt like once that we have that moment with Edie and Clayton, I want to get to the end. So what in revision, what I'm looking for is to figure out a way to move that scene, or at least the essence of the scene is Jimmy's proposal,
Mhm.
to earlier in the act. I think it has to happen before the raid, that he's going to make a stab at an offer of respectability to Lizzie. And in previous drafts, it did occur actually that encounter occurred in Act One.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, maybe I'll put it back in Act One, but there's really only one place for it to go in Act Two, and it would have to happen before the raid, which means it would have to be basically the second scene.
Mm.
And it's possible it could be that. Um, and it might just ultimately work better to put it back to Act One. And the reason I feel like I just want to get on with it, and it's kind of like once you have the major moment or the climactic moment, then we want to get to the resolution, you
Mhm.
know, as quickly as possible. And I don't want to take a detour into a subplot. That's basically my feeling. So also and previously in the previous draft, when he proposed to her, she rejects him. And she rejects him because she knows that he's not going to offer her anything better than what she's got right now. And that to me, also I think rings quite true. And if that happens, then that also motivates him finally to go to the police, because he can't think of any other way to get her out of the brothel. Um, so that's a revision I have in mind.
Okay.
I just have to sit down and do it, and I'll probably do that this weekend. But yeah,
Wonderful. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I also want to talk about this musical element in the play.
yeah.
It's not your first time working with music in one of your pieces. Um, However, this, and I want to get the name right here. Chris Heslop um arranged the music. But did you write the lyrics or the book
In
for?
some in some of the for some of the songs, some of them are existing songs that I wrote new lyrics for,
Okay.
but they're period songs. And like Sally Shearer's Home is actually a song called Maggie Murphy's Home. It's a lot more lyrics to it, a lot more
Okay.
stanzas. And I wrote new lyrics to fit that song. I wrote there was a new lyrics to another song. which is called After the Ball. We ended up using only a fragment of it, really, just the refrain,
Okay.
one of the transitions. Um, Trying to think, I think there's another one. And then in a couple of cases, they're the songs they're period songs, and I didn't change the lyrics because I thought the lyrics are really kind of suitable. And then there were two songs where I wrote original lyrics and Chris wrote original music.
Okay. Wow,
Yeah.
so at what point did how did that come about? Did you decide that this was a play that needed music, or when did that come into play?
Well, part of it was that the theater company has he's their a resident composer,
Okay.
and he writes like I think incidental music for just about every show they do. Excuse me. Um, and So I knew that this was a resource that they had. I mean, there wasn't a requirement. Nobody said to me, "Well, you've got to put music in the show." But when I realized that that Chris was available, um, that I thought it made sense because that it would be a play with music, and I also like the idea of using the music as a kind of a commentary as it began to evolve. um, that the character Bo, who was the narrator character who talks to the audience, I envisioned him as a piano player because the brothels all employed musicians. They almost all had a guy playing piano, and other musicians or entertainers.
Mm.
At least the high-end brothels did. And so I thought of him as somebody who might be sitting at an upright piano and he'd be playing some songs, and then he would talk to the audience, and then he might play some other tunes, or be playing at the top of the show, a kind of a pre-show, and he'd be at the piano playing. Um, and it turned out we weren't able to do that. The difficulty of casting an actor who could play, well enough to do that. Um, so the way they staged it at WSC was, as you saw, they had a guy on piano and a violinist, and they had them up
Hmm.
up on the stage, and I thought that worked well. I thought it was fine. Um, so, and I just lost my train of thought. What was your question again?
I'm just curious where
About the use of
that
music.
music was born out of. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, so it was something that as I was writing the play and the character of Bo began to evolve, I began to think of him more and more as a piano player or a musician of some kind who also interacts with the audience. Um, so and initially he was singing most of the songs. Like it was commentary. The music was meant to be a commentary and also a transition device. So you get from scene to scene, you'd have a song, and in the course of the song, maybe would be changing the scene. So it is meant to be kind of a choreographed kind of transition with music. Um, so yeah, so I kind of and I like the use of the songs. Especially in the brothel, I felt like it was kind of set the party tone.
Hmm.
Um, and I also like the use of them as this a commentary, and they have in my mind, the function of it is to it's kind of a Brechtian device, I guess. We're in the story, and then the songs also pull us out of the story, and ask us to kind of reflect on the story, and the song should reflect on the story. So that's my idea. I don't know how well it works. I like it.
No, yeah, I think it's actually it's something that's sort of present in Radium Girls too. I mean, when you have the reporters come out and they're sort of directly talking to the audience, there's other
Yeah.
intimate exposures as well, like the Purity Council comes out and is handing things out to the audience. I thought,
Yeah, the meeting hall, the
yeah,
WCTU meeting, yeah.
I
So this breaking up the kind of the more intimate naturalistic scenes between the characters with more presentational scenes, and the music is a then part of that presentational element. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I've done that in other plays.
yeah, yes, I thought it really worked. Yeah, there's something that, you know, I was thinking about during the play is, although this takes place 100 years ago, it seems like we're sort of having very similar conversations even today, especially about these ideas of, what is moral, who decides what moral is. Um, so why why did you find that this story was important to tell in 2024 United States?
Well, as you said, I think there's a lot of parallels between our time and Billy's time, 1890s. It's actually more than 100 years. It's more like 130 years. Um, it was a time of great um, income inequality, as we have today. The growth of the millionaire class in the Gilded Age. Today, it's the billionaire class. A handful of very, very wealthy people who have a lot of resources, a lot of money, and then a lot of working people who feel like they're locked out of the country's prosperity. Um, Women's rights, um, or with the Dobbs decision and the revoking Roe versus Wade, suddenly, we're back having a conversation that we thought about things that we thought had been settled 50 years ago. Um, and I don't know how much time you spend online or on social media, but in certain sectors, I'm seeing just crazy talk from certain quarters about what a mistake it was to give women the vote. This is coming from Christian nationalist um, characters who are posting on like Twitter and places like that, which is like seems kind of insane. But at the same time, we've seen that what we thought was settled law is suddenly is subtly overturned, and here we are again. And you look at this period, you look at um, the Victorian era, the Gilded Age is also time. There's a lot of like intense repression. This need to maintain one image to the world and then to go into a private space and be a completely different person. Um, I feel like we're moving back in that direction because there's so much talk now about and so much energy put into a lot of anti-trans bills, even anti-LGBTQ kinds of legislation in certain parts of the country that I feel like there's a push from certain sectors to want to dial us all back, and push people back into the closet so that people who've been able to come out and live freely, they can and have a legal marriage with their life partners and just have a regular life like anybody else, are suddenly the targets of attack. And I feel like what this what I would like the play to do is simply show people this past you're longing for wasn't such a great place.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, wow. And I mean, it's something that comes up in a lot of your work, this sort of I don't know, I hate to use the term political play, but yeah, it seems very much you're talking about, social issues that, even if our if our practices have changed, maybe our attitudes really have not.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm really interested to know your opinions on where you think art where is the place of art, especially going forward? I think that's a lot of what people are talking about, especially after this last election. You know, what is the place of art in social discourse?
Oh, well, I mean, it's where a lot of it can happen. Really, it's where a lot of the conversation can happen. Um, I mean, a play can present a world that you couldn't enter into otherwise. I mean, film can too, but dramatic um, productions of all kinds. It can take you places you couldn't otherwise go. I mean, we can't go back and live. We can't go back to and hang out in Sal's brothel ourselves, but I mean, the play can take you there, you know. Um, and the experience of living in that world for 2 hours and seeing how these characters, their struggle to survive and thrive within the world and the choices these women make, which are all just very practical choices. They're making practical choices for their immediate well-being. They're not, doing this because they're just inherently evil sluts. And I think one of the goals of the play really is to present the humanity of these women and present their predicament. They have hopes and dreams and um, a heart like anybody else. And they're kind of cornered. And well, it's true that there are other women who are in the same predicament who manage not to make those choices. These girls do, and you can't really blame them. It's the best of a lot of bad options. And so, being rational beings, you tend to choose the best of if all you have before you are unsavory choices, you're going to go with the least unsavory choice. Um, and yeah, so art, um, across all manner of the arts, visual arts, music, theater, dance, film, um, all of it. It's the means of expressing what we're living through. So I think it's more important than ever
Mhm,
um, that stories be told, and that these stories be told because um, they reflect on our times. And sometimes when you're going through certain experience in the present, um, it's really easier to deal with some of what we're wrestling with now by going to the past and telling a story that's set in another time and place, um, where a lot of these same issues are percolating, but we're not hitting them head on.
so you were talking about, um, using the past as a vehicle to discuss the present.
Right. It's about that's what Shakespeare does. I mean,
Mhm,
he's writing Romeo and Juliet, a plague on both your houses. It's set in fair Verona. Um, Really, it's about a British politics of the time. The divisions within Britain, between the Protestants and the Catholics, that eventually, uh, some years in the future, after his death, erupts into a civil war and leads to the Puritans finally taking control for, I think it was a good 20 years. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's sometimes, and that's why we it's why fiction can be so powerful. Um, if the present is too painful, if the facts are too painful to live with, fiction can give you a frame for for dealing with the trauma in a safe or safer way. We can live with a fictional story about a soldier who is so horribly disfigured in war that he loses his arms and his legs and even his face, and all he is just existing within his own memory and imagination in a hospital bed. And that's Dalton Trumbo's Johnny Got His Gun. Um, but to live with the reality of somebody who that actually happened to him, and there is this person in this situation, it's so horrific. You can hardly bear to, hardly bear to look, hardly bear to read about it.
Hmm.
So fiction gives you a framework for wrestling with a lot of things that we may find far too difficult to deal with, you know, in present terms. It gives us enough distance that we can wrestle with some of these things.
Have you ever have you ever found yourself in a position where you say, I don't feel I'm prepared to tell this story, or I don't know if it's right of me to put this on paper, or maybe I can't do this right now in a way that is respectful, um, or in a way that maybe you think, I don't know, people just wouldn't be ready for it. You know, I wonder if anything's off the table in the way you create.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, there's certainly stuff I wouldn't tackle. I don't think I'm like the best person to tackle that story. Um, there was a play I was trying to write that I kind of stopped um, and set aside um, because it was actually sort of a comedy about the Me Too movement. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure the world's ready yet for a comedy on this topic. So I think everything is ripe. Just
Hmm.
everything is ripe for parody, really. But sometimes, you know, it is too soon to uh to try to tackle certain things. And I had one play I was writing where I was writing a character that I just thought, I don't have a handle on this. And then other things come along that kind of pull you away. So but I'm going to get back to a couple of projects that and then there's just sometimes there's plays where I'm just my head is too much in something else, to be able to pull it. I have a hard time. I like to be able to focus on one project at a time, just write a draft, set it aside, then go work on something else, then go back to that. I have a hard time keeping two projects in my head at the same time. Some people can do that. I mean, they can go from they're working on one play, and then they'll go work on the other play, and then go within the same few days. And I find I have a real hard time with that. So there's a number of things I just set aside just because I didn't really have the bandwidth,
Hmm.
to focus on it right now. Um, so now this project is basically behind me. I've revisions I want to make, but it's very clear to me what I want to do, and the rewrites aren't going to take more than a day or two. So now I'm sort of clearing the decks to go tackle
Hmm.
some other things.
Yeah, you have I read your or Radium Girls is being adapted for a musical.
Yeah.
So how is that? I assume you're writing the book.
Yeah, essentially,
Okay.
the play is the book.
Okay.
We made some adjustments to the play, but it's pretty close to the existing script, except it's musicalized.
Hmm.
But we did make changes. We added some characters.
Okay.
I'm going to be looking for ways to, some cuts we'll probably make. Did make made a few cuts. Um, so we're going to do a reading of it in January. And so we'll hear what we have in the music and see how it's flowing and get a sense of how it's working. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting. So have you written the lyrics as well?
No, I'm working with a composer lyricist team,
Okay.
Stephen Alper and Sarah Knapp. Stephen writes the music and Sarah is a lyricist. So she's writing on the lyrics.
Mm.
And I'm just basically my contribution is the book and making adjustments to scenes as we, you know, figure out what we need to do. I made some, a number of cuts. Felt like I could tighten up certain scenes. Having seen it on its feet about 15 times, it's much more clear to me
Mm.
now where I can tighten things up. So we did that. And I think once we have this reading in January, then we'll um probably we'll have a conversation about uh other adjustments we might make to the book.
It it's so interesting to me that I mean you have Radium Girls is a highly produced play. On your website it says something over 1,200
It's up
productions.
to 2,000 now.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, my website is out of date. I've got to update it.
Wow. Yeah, I mean it must be really quite remarkable seeing I guess how it's taken on this very serious following. Um and I wonder how your relationship must have changed with it back since it was, originally conceived in the 2000s, versus now, when you've, I guess you can't be too distanced from it, working on a musical adaptation, but how 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 has that evolved of your relationship to it?
Um, well, it's kind of funny. Um I didn't really do much to bring it about. The play was published, it's 20 years now. And it's it started to get some productions, and initially, once it was published, it um got a handful of productions, and they were all in high schools. I was really, really kind of upset because I thought, oh, it's going to be published, so it'll be picked up by other theaters, and then I'll get more productions. And I was like, no, it was schools, and that came as a kind of a shock to me because even though I had had a few productions in colleges, I didn't see it as a high school show at all, and I didn't understand why high schools would want to do it. Um, it has some language in it that I wouldn't have written for high schools, and get a lot of requests for schools to cut those words. I didn't write it for high schools. Um, but it started to, and so it was sort of a slow build, and every year it got more productions. Um, and so I was like, oh well. I kept hoping that I'd be able to get a professional productions for it, but and I did get one or two. There's an ensemble in Chicago that did it, and there's another theater, I think, in Richmond. Um, but at the time, I didn't have a really good sense of like how to promote the play. I had tried everything before I got it published. We sent I sent queries and I sent it out to like 90 professional theaters, and none of them would touch it. And so once it was published and it was clear it was going to have a life basically in the educational theater, that's where it was going to be done. And it soon became clear to me why. I mean, it was written for 10 actors, which is a big cast for professional companies. And they're doubling into 38 parts, and there are a lot of really strong parts for women. And schools are just scrambling for big plays with good parts for girls, because those are still not in great supply. So that accounted for it, I think. And then it just sort of year after year, as word of mouth has just started to develop some momentum. And every year it keeps getting more places are doing it. And now more community theaters are doing it. It's getting done in community theaters more often now, and colleges and and high schools. And it did get a production in New York. A small professional company did it off Broadway. So that was a month run. So
Wow.
I was able to sort of see it realized by a professional company. Um, yeah, I don't know. I can never really like quite forget about it, because people are constantly sending me emails asking me if I'll do talkbacks with the students.
Mhm.
So I do a number of Zooms with kids who are doing the show, but they're all into it. People are very excited by it. Girls are excited by it. So, you know, more positive than negative comes of it. And it's got its own Facebook group now
Oh.
for people who are producing the play, people to go there and share production tips.
Mm.
Um, so going back and adapting it as a musical, I was a little ambivalent about that, I guess. But it seemed like it's kind of like, well, why not try it? And musical version, which now has 12 actors, at least currently. I think that's something else we're going to be kind of wrestling with, whether we can do it with 10. I think for vocal, because of vocal, for reasons of um, the range of singers that the composer and lyricist want for certain numbers, we went up to 12. So we'll see if we can get away with maybe doing it with fewer, but 12 in a musical is not not a huge,
Mhm.
like a lot of musicals have much bigger casts than that. So it's not a chamber musical, but it's not a huge musical. And so we'll see how that works out. Um,
Y-
so I don't know. I mean, it's nice. It's nice that people like the play, and that it gets a lot of productions. I've written a lot of other plays that I wish I could have that
Yeah.
kind of traction, but so I don't know. It's
Yeah,
gonna do what it do, I guess.
you mentioned how sometimes you'll get requests if that particular group might make some changes to the script, whether it be to remove some language or
Right.
something. Typically, when that type of thing happens, is that something that you are usually averse to, or what is your take when
No,
people
I
try and
mean, these
alter
are
it?
high school productions, and the offending language is, I think it's one place, one character says God damn, or something
Oh.
like that. Or so it's like it's the swear words that they
Mhm.
want to cut. I mean, it's nothing but there's no F bombs in the play. I mean, it's
Yeah.
set in the 20s, but it's like that, or somebody saying damn this, or I think at one point he goes, Jesus Christ, what happened, or something like that. Um, those are the kinds of things that they want to cut. Like the kids can't cuss on stage.
Mhm.
So some schools will let them and not care, and some schools um, won't. So and I don't care. I mean, that's not a hill to die on for me, it's like, what I suggest to them is that he's got to say something there. So come up with something else that
Mhm.
can convey a degree of horror or whatever it is, that the character is experiencing. He's got to say something. He can't just go, oh, you know. So
Yeah.
at
I
this point, so I mean, I'm not too bad. The where I do draw the line though is where they want to make changes that I feel change the meaning of the play.
okay.
So there is certain language, certain things um that happen. Um and there's one in particular is the one guy is talking about readers' parent policy of he's kind of liberal in terms of who he hires to work in the factory. And he talks about this one girl and he says, well, she was a complete cripple. Her father had to carry her up the stairs. That's the phrase he uses. And one or two schools had contacted me and they didn't want it, the student didn't want to say the word cripple. And they wanted to cut that. And I said, well, think about what that tells us about this guy who's saying that, what kind of
Mhm.
character he is, who talks about people that way. And also it's this is a way people talked about people with disabilities in the 1920s.
Yeah.
It might not be a word you consider to be very pleasant or PC today, but this is what the language that people used.
Mhm.
And if you excise that, it's a kind of whitewashing of the past. This is how people thought about people with
Yeah.
disabilities at that time. And we should know that. Why should we pretend that people were more enlightened than they were?
Mhm.
So that's the kind of thing where I'll, but it doesn't come up very often. So um, either there aren't too many places that are concerned about it, or they're just not asking.
Mhm.
So that's the other thing is you can't really do anything if somebody's producing it and they make some changes to the script. Unless somebody goes to see it who knows the play and knows you're not really gonna know.
Right.
So you just hope that they honor their contract because their contract requires them to do the play as written. If
Yeah.
they want to make changes, they have to get written permission.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really it's funny. There's a local theater that's going to do Radium Girls in their next season. Um in the
Oh,
Red
yeah.
area.
Is
Uh,
it Yoakum Arts Center, I think.
oh, is it? Is it? I heard Genesius was doing it, which is another local theater
Oh,
around.
it's entirely possible.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just yeah, I'm wondering in terms of even like I don't know, staging or some sort of bizarre set or even, creative choices with the text. I know that the Edward Albee estate is really sort of hesitant to allow gender bending and this sort of
Oh
thing.
yeah, Albee was notorious for
Mhm.
policing his productions.
Is this something
Really.
that you're interested in as well? Like, you want to, it should be as written and, you know.
No, I mean, I think that, you're right. Listen, it took me 30 drafts to get Radium Girls to where I feel like it works.
Mhm.
Um, and you put that much labor into something and that much thought into something, it's not arbitrary. Things are in there for a reason. And my feeling is if you got a problem with the script and you feel like you really can't do it because of a certain scene, um, then don't do the script.
Mhm.
Another thing that schools want to do a lot of times, is there's really only four guys in the play. You can do it with four men, a minimum of four men. There's more than four male parts, but four guys could double into all the parts, and that you can do it with four, but they can't even come up with four. And so they have to cast women in some of the parts. And so they'll want to change the role to like one case was like the attorney for the company, Mr. Markley. Can we make a Miss Markley? And I was like, no, no,
Mhm.
the whole point of it is that it's the male power structure and the women who are struggling to get justice within this world that's run by men. And that's why when you have the scene with the board members, at least in the original play, we did a lot of cross-gender
Mm.
stuff, and the women played board to fill out the board. We had to use the women, but make it clear that the board members are meant to be men, so they have to be presented as men.
Mhm.
However you do that. I mean, in the original production, we put them in, gave them fedoras and cigars, and they were sitting there. You know, I mean, you could see that they had skirts on, but the women are playing it as men, and that's it. It just has to read. These are guys. You know, that's the message. They're all guys. They're not women on the board. They are guys. Um, and so then when they want to change something like that, I feel like that undercuts the story. It undercuts the story to do that. So I tell them they can't. I said, no, I don't care if you know, you're not going to fool anybody into thinking this girl is a man, but character she's playing is Mr. Markley. So put her in slacks, put her in a suit, you know, and tie, and let her play it. And the audience will go with it, present these women who have to play the men, present them as men. They're not women. And so some schools are okay with that, and some schools are like, well, that like they
Yeah.
can't they can't quite go with it. But I sort of feel like the play has a lot of fluidity in terms of how you cast it. I mean, really, I don't, however you want to cast it, cast your strongest actors in the play, is my feeling. Get the best that you've got to do these parts. Um, you know, so um, whoever you want to use. But you can't mess with the gender assignments because that's very specific.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a play about gender politics.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. All right. I only have a couple more questions, and
sure.
really typically, I mean, we are, our little rag is serving a lot of up and coming creatives, theater majors, creative writing majors, people that are interested in creating theater or making a career from their own writing. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, um, to two people that are interested in getting into playwriting or trying to make a career in the theater, what is your advice to them?
Um, well, two thoughts, depending on what you're interested is in theater. I would say, well, you need to be somewhere where there's a lot of theater, and where you can build the contacts and build the connections that you need to be able to get work. So if you're interested in acting, you have to go somewhere um, where there are plays being done. So which means gonna have to go to some urban area, generally, and um, and if you're interested in acting professionally, and that's not necessarily in New York. That's not the place I would tell people to go to start out. I mean, you can go there and give it a shot, but it's very musical theater oriented. If you don't do musical theater, um, you might want to try some other place. Um, like Philadelphia is a great theater town. There's a lot going on there. Minneapolis is a great place for theater. Chicago, um, even Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. There's a lot of theater. Um, if you want to stay in, like if somebody wants to stay in central Pennsylvania, um, then you're going to have to work more regionally, travel a little further to look for work, and you might not be able to. You might get paying gigs. You might have to arrange your life differently. I mean, you're not going to be able to necessarily live off of what are the small professional companies in the region might pay. I mean, even professional companies in a city like DC, it's not great pay. People don't survive on their acting alone. They cobble together acting gigs with other kinds of um, things. Like a lot of actors I know work at a Library of Congress. They do a talking books program, book recordings. they do industrial films. They'll teach, they'll come up with other, and some of them, this standard cliches. And if you're in New York, you're a working actor in New York, then you're a you're a bartender or a waiter. A lot of people work in the restaurant business for their rent jobs just to keep it together between, acting gigs. That's just that's the lifestyle. But the important thing is if you're serious about it and you want to do it, then just get as much experience as you can, like while you're in school, get involved with the productions, and don't worry about whether you get cast. It's nice to get cast, but it's also really instructive to work on a show, to work backstage, or to stage manage, or work on promotions, and work every aspect of a production that you can while you're in school, and try to get into an acting class. I think everybody, no matter what you're doing in theater, you should understand all the other elements of theater to some degree. So to the extent you can take a design course, take an acting class, take a playwriting class, just understand all the moving parts and get involved in as many productions as you can. You in the summertime, when you're not in school, there are theaters that are producing like summer productions, and you can volunteer for at those theaters and try to get involved. Particularly if they're professional companies and they have volunteer opportunities, or there's internship opportunities. Those are things you should try to seek out. Yeah. And if your interest is playwriting, I would say the same thing. But my emphasis would be take an acting class. You really need to understand the actor's process if you're going to write plays, because you're writing for actors. So you need to understand action, objective, obstacle, character motive, shifting tactics. You need to understand how an actor will look at a script and then tackle the script, that they're always looking for the action. They're always trying to figure out what they're doing and why they're doing it. So it's really helpful for playwrights to take acting, or even try to get on stage if you can. I think it makes you a better playwright. And then aside from that, you just start writing plays. Start out with short plays, and 10-minute plays are a good way to start, because there's a lot of competitions out there, and there's a lot of times a lot of 10-minute festivals, and you send off your 10-minute plays here and there, something will hit, you may get on its feet, or you may get, if you're writing short plays, you can pull together an evening of short works at the school. Probably, on your own as a student project. I don't know what the theater students at Albright are required to do, whether they have to do, directing projects, but it seems to me like if you've got enough interest, you've got other students who would like to act, and maybe they're not getting cast, then write a short play for those actors, and see if would get together with you, and write 3 of them and just put it up. Do a
Yeah.
reading, or do a production. See if there's a room on campus that you can get space somewhere in one of the performance spaces at an odd hour. You can do a late night series. Pull things together. Just be as entrepreneurial as you can, and mostly it's about just doing it. Because if you do it, you're going to learn, and it doesn't matter. You may do something and you feel like, oh, that's just terrible. It was just dreadful. That's happened to me. And objectively, maybe it didn't work. Really, there were a lot of problems, but you learn a tremendous amount from those mistakes, and seeing the things that didn't work. It's a painful lesson, but sometimes, you need to do it, and ultimately it's just about getting out there and doing it, and learning from learning from your mistakes. And um, so if you can do something like that while you're in school, um, for your friends, for whoever on campus may come out and see it, your family, it's how it's learning, developing those skills, only happen. You can only develop those skills by basically by exercising those skills. So you're not going to learn to be a director unless you direct. You're not going to learn to be an actor unless you act, and you're not going to learn to be a playwright unless you write plays. And that's what you have to do. And it's great to have classes and great to have faculty who can guide you. But even if you don't, um, go out there and do it anyway. And you're going to learn to be a better director by starting out being a bad director. You just have to be open to looking at things, I can't say objectively, but less personally. So you put your work out there and you have to develop the ability to step back from it and look at it from a distance and try to examine if things aren't working so well, what went wrong? What do I do differently next time? Something happened in the process or something. Where did things go off course?
Mhm,
Or maybe they didn't go off course and you've got something that's it's great and you're proud of, but you need to be able to do it, and you need to not take it personally, not take failures personally, and not take rejection personally. That's probably the biggest thing I could say, is because in theater it's you're going to meet a lot of rejection. If you're an actor, you're going to be rejected a lot. You're going to audition and you won't get cast, and it's going to be demoralizing. So you have to find a way to look at how you can turn those auditions into opportunities to connect with people who maybe they don't use you this time, but they might remember you because you're a very agreeable and charming person. And you have to think about, like as a writer, the same way. Every rejection is an opportunity to learn something, or to think about how you, or maybe even connect. So when I get rejection letters, I send thank you notes.
mhm,
Don't get letters so much anymore. We get emails, but I always try to respond if I get one, and just say thanks for letting me know, and thank you for taking the time to read my script.
mm,
Um, and people will remember. If you respond negatively, like, you idiot, how dare you reject my
mm,
play? That's not going to get you anywhere.
mhm. Yeah. Well, Ms. Gregory, thank you so much for sitting down with me, for taking the time this afternoon, to share your time with this, our little, student paper here. On behalf of not only the Albright Arts Magazine, but Albright College in general, thank you for this. On behalf of the theater department, the English department, on everybody. This is really special. It's a really special treat, and it's a privilege.
Well, thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thanks. I enjoyed talking to you. And good luck with the article.